Just, what is it you think I can do for you?
You could tell me how someone can fake a prevision.
How would I know that?
Because you invented pre-crime. What's so funny?
If the unintended consequences of a series of genetic mistakes and science gone haywire can be called invention, yes, then I invented pre-crime.
You don't seem all that proud.
I'm not. I was trying to heal them, not turn them into something else.
Heal who?
The innocence we now use to stop the guilty.
You're talking about the precogs.
You think the 3 in the tank come out of a test tube? They are merely the ones who survived. I was doing genetic research at the Woodhaven Clinic, treating children of drug addicts. This was 10 years ago when heroin first hit the streets. It was an impure form of the drug, not the engineered cocktail that became so popular among the more educated. All of these kids were born with severe brain damage. Most died before the age of 12. Those few, those precious few who survived, they had a gift. I call it a gift. For them, it was more like a cosmic joke. They would wake up in the night, curled up in the corner of the room, screaming, clawing at the wallpaper, because when these little children, you see, closed their eyes at night, they dreamt only of murder over and over, one after the other. And it didn't take long for us to realize that the real nightmare was that these so-called dreams were about to come true. These murders were actually happening.
You say some of the children died.
Oh, so many of them, despite what we did for them, or maybe because of what we did to them. But it doesn't matter. It's a perfect system now, isn't it?
I'm not going to commit murder. I've never met the man I'm supposed to kill.
And yet a chain of events has started, a chain that will lead you inexorably to his murder.
Not if I stay away from him.
How can you avoid a man you never met?
So you won't help me?
I can't help you. Nobody can. The precogs are never wrong. But occasionally, they do disagree.
What?
In a world overflowing with movies, we need a hero. Someone to separate the bad from the good.
Sounds like a job. Verbal dioramas. Watches all the movies from comedy to drama. From the top row sound. And don't forget the action. She'll watch until the end and then she'll give you her reaction. Movies you know, movies you don't. Prequels, sequels, remakes, and trivia and outtakes. Movies you know, movies you don't. Interesting stories, all the categories.
Hi everyone, I'm Em and welcome to Verbal Diorama episode 339, Minority Report. This is the podcast that's all about the history and legacy of movies you know and movies you don't, that's just popped a red ball for this episode. Victim, this episode. Perpetrator, me, because I'm going to kill it this episode. Haha, see what I did there. Welcome to Verbal Diorama, whether you're a brand new listener, whether you're a regular returning listener. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for choosing to listen to this podcast. I am, as always, so happy to have you here for the history and legacy of Minority Report. And if you are a regular returning listener, thank you so much for returning to this podcast, listening to this podcast, and continuing to listen and support this podcast. This podcast has been going for over 7 years and now 339 episodes, and I'm always so blown away by your support. So thank you so much for your continued support. It means so much. So this month, I wanted to focus on our ongoing cinematic relationship with AI. I've dubbed the month AI-April, just because. And AI is a topic that's rarely out of the news for both good and bad reasons. And last episode, I started in the 80s with Short Circuit, a movie that hasn't aged that well, but also kind of has, because number 5 is incredible and just such a wonderful creation. And that movie is 40 years old and number 5 has not aged a day. Kind of going from the 80s and all of what the 80s encompassed with the Cold War and fears over nuclear war, etc., kind of jumping over the 90s because I thought about it. And honestly, I've already done an episode on Terminator 2 Judgment Day, and what other AI movies are there in the 90s? I'm kidding. That is episode 175 of this podcast. But I also wanted to move into the 2000s specifically for this movie, which isn't based around AI per se, but it would go ahead and predict the future, our reality, with startling accuracy. Here's the trailer for Minority Report.
Okay, Jad, what's coming?
Double homicide, one male, one female. Killer's male, white, 40s.
Set up a perimeter and tell them we're en route. I'm placing you under arrest for the future murder of Sarah Marks. Give the man his hat.
The future can be seen.
All we have to run on are the images that they produce.
We see what they see. There hasn't been a murder in 6 years. There's nothing wrong with the system. It is perfect. I agree.
Murder can be stopped.
Tell me exactly what it is you're looking for.
Flaws.
You ever get any false positives? We are arresting individuals who have broken no law.
But they will.
The fact that you prevented it from happening doesn't change the fact that it was going to happen.
The system can't be wrong.
You say something, Chief?
No. You're in a lot of trouble, John. I have a warrant in my pocket that says murder.
Don't run.
You don't have to chase me.
From 20th Century Fox
He set me up. He set me up!
and DreamWorks Pictures.
Who's the victim? I've never heard of him, but I'm supposed to kill him in less than 36 hours.
He's coming here to get her.
Tom Cruise
I need your help. If you contain information, I need to know how to get at it.
in a Steven Spielberg film.
I have to know. I have to find out what happened in my life. You tell me, who was it that set this up?
I don't know.
How about now?
On June 21st, everybody runs.
No, it's hard.
Minority Report.
In Washington, D.C., in the year 2054, murder has been eliminated. The future is seen and the guilty punished before the crime has ever been committed. From deep within the Justice Department's elite pre-crime unit, all the evidence to convict, from imagery alluding to the time, place and other details, is seen by the precogs, 3 psychic beings whose visions of murder have never been wrong. It is the nation's most advanced crime force, a perfect system. And no one works harder for pre-crime than its top man, Chief John Anderton. Destroyed by the tragic loss of his young son, Anderton has thrown all of his passion into a system that could potentially spare thousands of people from the tragedy he lived through. 6 years later, the coming vote to take it national has only fueled his conviction that pre-crime works. He has no reason to doubt the system until the precogs predict that he will murder a total stranger in less than 36 hours, and John Anderton becomes pre-crime's #1 suspect. Let's run through the cast. We have Tom Cruise as John Anderton, Max von Sydow as Lamar Burgess, Colin Farrell as Danny Whitwer, Samantha Morton as Agatha, Neil McDonough as Gordon Fletcher, Patrick Kilpatrick as Jeffrey Knott, Lois Smith as Dr. Iris Hinneman, Catherine Morris as Lara Anderton, Tim Blake Nelson as Gideon, Daniel London as Wally, and Peter Stormare as Dr. Solomon P. Eddy. Minority Report has a screenplay by Scott Frank and John Cohen, was directed by Steven Spielberg, and was based on The Minority Report by Philip K. Dick. This April, it's a great name, isn't it? We've already talked about Short Circuit in the 80s and bypassed the 90s. Now we're in the 2000s. And Steven Spielberg was no stranger to AI. He literally made the film AI Artificial Intelligence in 2001, a long-time project first conceived by Stanley Kubrick, taken over by Spielberg after Kubrick's death in 1999, and the first to be directed and written by Spielberg since Close Encounters of the Third Kind in 1977. Minority Report was the direct follow-up to AI, but Minority Report, in my opinion, is the more interesting of the two. It's both dystopian and utopian. It predicts the future, our current, with remarkable accuracy. We may not have pre-crime, but we have touchscreens. We may not have cars that can drive down walls, but we do have driverless autonomous cars and cars that can be tracked. We may not have retinal scanners in shops and public transport, but we have devices that are constantly listening. They know our previous purchases or where we go on the internet, and CCTV is always recording our every move. We may not have precogs, but many US police forces often use drones to scout areas before human officers go in. They may not look quite like spiders, but they have thermal imaging and heat scans, which require warrants to be used. We can't yet predict murder before it happens, but the genius of Minority Report is that, being honest, we probably don't want that future, despite the lives it will save, because like everything, there's always a cost. Minority Report is based on Philip K. Dick's 1956 short story, The Minority Report, first published in Fantastic Universe magazine. In a future society, 3 mutants foresee all crime before it occurs. Plugged into a great machine, these precogs allow a division of the police called Pre-Crime to arrest suspects before they commit any actual crimes. When the head of Pre-Crime, John Anderton, is himself predicted to murder a man whom he's never heard of, Anderton is convinced a great conspiracy is afoot. Like much of Dick's work, it explores his own personal anxieties, questions autonomy with themes of authoritarianism, free will and the fallibility of systems. The titular Minority Report being the difference of opinion from one of the precogs. It isn't the first Philip K. Dick story to be featured on this podcast. A Scanner Darkly was the 150th episode of this podcast, and Dick's stories often make fantastic movies, but aren't always faithfully replicated for the screen. In the case of Minority Report, Dick's story was used more as a jumping-off point, and much of the plot is changed. The now legendary science fiction author wrote hundreds of short stories during the 50s and 60s, but was never commercially successful. Dick died before the completion of the first film based on his work, Ridley Scott's Blade Runner in 1982. But his stories have inspired generations of writers and filmmakers and posed vital questions that continue to resonate with the advancement of society and technology. As I said, there are some differences between the book and the movie. In the short story, which is set in New York City, John Anderton is a 50-year-old, balding, out-of-shape police commissioner who created Pre-Crime, and Ed Whitwer is his new second-in-command. The precogs, named Mike, Donna and Jerry, are described as gibbering, fumbling creatures, physically and intellectually disabled. The precogs constantly receive information about all manner of future crimes, not just murder. Anderton's would-be victim is General Leopold Kaplan, a retired military figure trying to dismantle pre-crime to restore military authority. Anderton actually has 3 minority reports showing different possible outcomes. The first is that he would kill Kaplan in order to prevent pre-crime from being discredited and shut down. The second, that after reading the first, he would decide to not kill Kaplan. And the third, stating Kaplan had planned to discredit pre-crime in order to enact a state of emergency and martial law, resulting in a military coup in which the army would replace pre-crime. Anderton chooses to kill Kaplan, fulfilling the first prediction deliberately to preserve the pre-crime system, knowing that it means his own exile. The entire situation becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. At the end, Anderton warns Whitwer, who has now inherited Anderton's job, that the same predicament could happen to him at any time. The idea to make a movie of Minority Report was first optioned by producer Gary Goldman in 1992. He's the writer of Big Trouble in Little China and Total Recall, which is also an adaptation of Philip K. Dick. He created an initial script with Ronald Shusett, with uncredited writing work by Robert Goethals. Shusett, along with co-writer Dan Bannon, created the Alien franchise. The movie version of Minority Report was initially conceived as a sequel to the 1990 Arnold Schwarzenegger film Total Recall, with Schwarzenegger set to reprise his role of Douglas Quaid. But as I've spoken about in other episodes, namely Cutthroat Island, Carolco Pictures, the production company responsible for Total Recall, went bankrupt in 1995 before the project could move forward. Miramax picked up the remake rights to Total Recall 2 in 1997, and by then, Goldman and Shusett had stripped out the Total Recall elements to develop it as a standalone film based on The Minority Report. Novelist John Cohen was hired in 1997 to rewrite the script completely, his only credited work as a screenwriter. The only original element from the early Goldman and Shusett script which made it to the final film is the sequence in the car factory, which was an idea that Steven Spielberg loved. This actually led to the original writers suing for the right to have their name in the film's credits as co-writers, but due to the extremely strict rules of the Writers Guild about how much of the script must be written by a person to get credit, the final ruling in arbitration was that the original writers could only get an executive producer credit and not a writing credit. The initial version of Minority Report was briefly set to be directed by Dutch filmmaker Jan de Bont. But in a remarkable turn of events, he is instead credited as a producer, despite doing no work on the movie. And the reason for that is the involvement of Steven Spielberg. And this is a project with a long gestation, so let's try and go through the timelines involved. So Steven Spielberg and Tom Cruise first met when the actor was making his breakout film Risky Business in 1983, and they'd kept a keen eye out for a project they could do together. Spielberg had been set to direct Cruise in Rain Man, but left to make Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. In the mid-90s, Spielberg approached Stephen King about making a haunted house film, and the two agreed to work on a remake of Robert Wise's 1963 film The Haunting. After collaborating on the screenplay, they ran into creative differences, and King left the project, with Spielberg pushing forward with a new screenwriter, David Self. Meanwhile, Jan de Bont was working on Twister, and producing that movie was Steven Spielberg. The production was chaotic, and allegedly Spielberg visited the set, or more accurately the local airport, where de Bont met him, and admonished the director, yelling at de Bont for 15 minutes before leaving in the same jet. Production got back in order, and Twister ended up being a big hit, but it's safe to say the two men had a fractured relationship. But Jan de Bont was hot property at the time, having directed Speed. Twister was Speed's follow-up. His next film was another troubled production though, Speed 2 Cruise Control, which was a critical and commercial disappointment. With Jan de Bont still in post-production for Twister, Spielberg offered him a deal. De Bont could replace him as director of The Haunting, and Spielberg would take over directing duties on Minority Report while de Bont was occupied. And this would lead to de Bont's infamous no actual work done producing credit. By this point, the Minority Report adaptation had been around for at least a decade. While shooting the late Stanley Kubrick's Eyes Wide Shut, the Minority Report script caught Cruise's eye. When Cruise read Cohen's script, he passed it on to Spielberg as the project they could finally do together, and in 1998 the pair officially joined Minority Report, announcing it as a joint venture between Spielberg's DreamWorks and Amblin Entertainment, 20th Century Fox, and Cruise's Cruise Wagner Productions. The plan was to begin shooting in August 1999, but two major productions interrupted proceedings. The first was Tom Cruise was in the middle of making Mission Impossible 2 in Australia, and that film's schedule kept pushing back, which in turn delayed Minority Report's production. The delays turned out to be something of a blessing, as Spielberg used the extra time to bring in experienced screenwriter Scott Frank to substantially rework Cohen's material. Frank had already written Little Man Tate, Malice, Get Shorty and Out of Sight. He'd go on to write Marley and Me, The Wolverine, Logan and the Netflix adaptation of The Queen's Gambit. The final shooting script was very much Frank's, drawing heavily on Cohen's third draft. Variety reported Frank Darabont would do uncredited script revision work, however, although he was asked, he did The Majestic instead. John August, however, did do uncredited script revision work. In contrast to Spielberg's next science fiction picture War of the Worlds, which he called 100% character-driven, Spielberg said the story for Minority Report became 50% character and 50% very complicated storytelling with layers and layers of murder, mystery and plot. But But Spielberg was also distracted by AI, artificial intelligence, the long-gestating project he inherited from Stanley Kubrick after Kubrick's death in 1999. AI also ran over schedule, pushing Minority Report back further. These delays also led to casting changes. While Tom Cruise was a given, when Spielberg originally signed on to direct, he planned to have an entirely different supporting cast. He offered the role of Witwer to Matt Damon, Iris Hinneman to Meryl Streep, Burgess to Ian McKellen, Agatha to Cate Blanchett, and Lara to Jenna Elfman. Streep declined the role, Damon opted out due to scheduling conflicts with Ocean's 11 and The Bourne Identity. The role was also offered to Javier Bardem, who also turned it down, and the other roles were recast due to the delays. Production on Minority Report would eventually begin in March 2001, after both the Mission Impossible 2 and AI commitments had been fulfilled, and Spielberg, Frank and DreamWorks' Walter Parkes used the scheduling gap to work together to shape the complex storyline. At Spielberg's insistence, Spielberg and Cruise both agreed to each take 15% of the gross instead of any money up front to try and keep Minority Report's budget under $100 million. And this was something Spielberg had done in the past with big-name actors, like Tom Hanks in Saving Private Ryan. If Spielberg had to take a chance, so did Tom Cruise. Steven Spielberg decided early on that he wanted the visual world of Minority Report to create a plausible future reality for the year 2054, as opposed to a more traditional science fiction setting. To do this, he brought together a panel of experts to put more science fact into his science fiction. In 1999, he invited 15 experts to a hotel in Santa Monica for a 3-day think tank summit, including Global Business Network co-founder Peter Schwartz, founder and editor of the Whole Earth catalogue Stuart Brand, architect Peter Calthorpe, author Doug Coupland, urbanist and journalist Joel Garreau, computer scientist Neil Gershenfeld, biomedical researcher Sean Jones, computer scientist Jaron Lanier, conceptual designer Harold Belker, MIT Media Lab researcher John Underkoffler, and former MIT architecture dean William J. Mitchell. The delay to filming also proved valuable for both the screenwriter and the production designer Alex McDowell to collaborate on the development of the words and images that would become Spielberg's film. And thanks to the Think Tank Summit, McDowell put together an 80-page 2054 Bible, which listed all the aspects of the future world, from architectural, socio-economic, political and technological. Much of this information came directly from the people and companies who were actively developing it, such as touchscreen technology, which would become commonplace in the mid-2000s. There was no script when McDowell and his team started working on the production design, and they had a year without one, but during that time they were given the opportunity to develop the interior logic of the practical designs for the cars, weapons and hover packs, and really test everything properly. Usually they would have 4 or 5 months to do this before shooting, but the team had more like 15 months of prep before the movie started filming, which was valuable time to really perfect the design of Minority Report and the believability of the props and sets. Steven Spielberg wanted not to make a science fiction film, but to make a film about a future reality. Alex McDowell's production design would not only be futuristic, but also historical. For example, we're currently in 2025, but I live in a house built in 1959. In 2054, people will be living in modern apartment complexes with futuristic design, but they'll also still be living in mid-20th century townhouses. And we see this in the opening scene with the attempted pre-crime murder of Sarah Marks by her husband Howard. The future Washington, D.C. in the movie keeps well-known buildings such as the Capitol and the Washington Monument, as well as a section of modern buildings on the other side of the Potomac River. Spielberg also enlisted his regular cinematographer, Janusz Kaminski, whose visuals verge on black and white, leaning into the 1940s film noir tone. Kaminski wasn't the only Academy Award winner behind the scenes either. There was also Oscar-winning editor Michael Kahn, Oscar-winning costume designer Deborah L. Scott, and multiple Oscar winner John Williams composing the score. Kaminsky deliberately overlit the movie, and it was shot on film rather than digitally to create the bleach bypass look photochemically. He shot on high-speed film in Super 35 format, which requires an additional enlarging process to increase the overall grain, having been told by Spielberg to create the ugliest, dirtiest movie he'd ever shot. Kaminsky alternated between 17, 21 and 27mm lenses, never using a lens longer than 27mm. Alex McDowell studied modern architecture, and his sets contain many curves, circular shapes and reflective materials. The production design team put together an ethos that the pre-crime department had to be very clean and clinical, like any modern corporate headquarters. It was designed as a series of concentric circles based on a ripple pattern. The precog chamber being the pebble drop in the centre of pre-crime, and the narrative that starts in the precog chamber ripples out into the narrative of the film, and the architecture reflects that. Even the colour scheme reflects cool blue tones and transparency, just like water in a pond. The pre-crime set was the most expensive set in the movie, and Spielberg didn't even see it until a couple of days before filming began because he wanted to get that visceral experience seeing it for the first time. Spielberg's vision also extended to the digital prison, keeping the pre-crime perpetrators in suspended animation. He saw it as a graveyard with headstones of all the people in storage, and that part of the set was built in previs. They mastered a conceptual idea of vertical tubes that were underground with headstones and then laid them out in a pattern that the camera would swoop down and follow, with each headstone moving up and down to avoid the crane arm. They loved the pattern and rhythm of the shot, animated it first, and Spielberg loved the shot he could get from it. They ended up building the main room the headstones come out of, and 3 or 4 of the tubes in their entirety, with a dolly arm for the crane arm, but otherwise everything was a green screen set. Now, Minority Report was the first film to have an entirely digital production design. The term previs, as an abbreviation of previsualization, was actually a term borrowed from this film's narrative. This system allowed them to use Photoshop in place of painters and employ 3D animation programs to create a simulated set, which could then be filled with digital actors, and they could block shots in advance. The technology also allowed the tie-in video game and the special effects companies to cull data from the previous system before the film was finished, which they could then use to establish parameters for their visuals. Industrial Light and Magic handled the bulk of the effects work, developing entirely new techniques to enhance the CG elements and environments of the futuristic world. The hologram sequence featuring Anderton's ex-wife was filmed using 13 cameras simultaneously, all pointing at the actress from different angles, with the results blended together. ILM computer graphics supervisor Barry Armour said that they deliberately wanted the holograms to look semi-amateurish from the viewer's perspective, but perfect from Anderton's own point of view. John Underkoffler created the gestural language that would allow Anderton to sort and conduct the visual information he was getting from the precogs. Commands were developed for stopping time, rolling backwards and forwards, and making excerpts or changing views. These pre-visual images were created by effects house Imaginary Forces, and because the human eye sees in circles, they made the pre-visions look spherical. Spielberg wanted the specific hand movements to play like a choreographed dance, with music played during the scene to enhance the dance. The 3 precogs, Dashiell, Arthur and Agatha, named after famous mystery writers Dashiell Hammett, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle and Agatha Christie, live deep within pre-crime headquarters, partially submerged in a fluid that is intended as both a biological nutrient and as a medium that helps to channel future visions into their heads. It also filters the images so the precogs will only see murder. Samantha Morton considers Agatha the most difficult role she's ever done, not just for the emotional gravity inherent in such a complicated and abstract character, but also for the physical demands of the role, and that was mostly for acting in water. Costume designer Deborah Scott designed a wetsuit for Morton that enabled her to be protected from the constant submersion, but it was still an arduous task. The part required Morton shave her hair and her eyebrows, and honestly, it sounds like a wholly uncomfortable experience for her. And to add to the ethical questions around the pre-crime system, the three precogs are not even really treated as human beings. They are constantly traumatised to predict these murders. They're not even being treated like employees. They seem to have zero rights, human or otherwise. And yet again, it's adding to the idea that this may be a future that, without the nuances, we may want to eradicate murder. But at what cost? At the cost of the freedom of these three individuals. Now, some may say the lives of three people versus the lives of all of the murder victims, but it's never just that black and white. And of course, throughout all of this, we have the skeptic, Danny Whitwer, played by Colin Farrell, who's positioned as a bad guy. But as we find out, he's not against Anderton, just against the idea. Minority Report was filmed between March and July 2001, and Farrell, who celebrated his 25th birthday during filming, had a very fun night out for it, and he requested not to work on his birthday on the 31st of May 2001, but instead was issued with a 6 a.m. pickup time the next morning. And he was both still hungover and drunk when he showed up to set the next day. We call it hair of the dog here in the UK. Even after an assistant director told him he couldn't work in that condition, Farrell continued, and it took him 46 takes to shoot the "I'm sure you've all grasped the fundamental paradox of pre-crime methodology" scene. Crikey, I couldn't even say that sober, let alone drunk. Tom Cruise was apparently livid, and I'm not surprised, understandably, because everyone's been at work when the hungover or drunk colleague comes in, and it's not nice. 3 years after the incident, Farrell checked himself into a rehab centre, doing the same again in 2018 as a preemptive measure. Considering this movie is almost the same age as Farrell turned while filming, the visual effects still look great. The sequence where police pursue Anderson across the elevated roads was shot entirely on blue screen, with animatics by Pixel Liberation Front used first to work out traffic flow. Tom Cruise physically jumped and hung from full-scale car replicas on set, which were then digitally replaced with computer-generated vehicles. ILM compositing supervisor Scott Frankel described the vertical alley chase as one of the film's central sequences. This was filmed on set at the Warner Brothers studio lot. The building heights were digitally extended, walls were added, and skies were replaced entirely to remove any trace of the wires used to suspend crews. In reality, the set was only 4 stories tall, and it was made to look like it was 12 stories tall. But like most movies that age particularly well from this era, the effects work wasn't purely digital. ILM art director Alexander Laurent noted that they used traditional physical models alongside the 3D work, specifically to make structures feel like they were made of concrete and steel rather than weightless computer geometry. The auto factory chase scene was filmed in a real facility using real welding robots. The stunt crew on Minority Report was the same crew used in Mission Impossible 2. PDI DreamWorks were responsible for the spider robots used in the eye scanning sequence. They took inspiration for the design of the spiders from deep-sea jellyfish and their bioluminescent little tentacle lights. This actually turned out to be PDI DreamWorks' final live-action visual effects job before the studio shifted exclusively to animated features. To make the world of Minority Report as real as possible and to highlight the predicted lack of privacy and excessive marketing and advertisements, you had to use real companies and product placement, but the aesthetics still have to match, and companies are paying to be included in your movie. So they pitched a car design to Lexus, a design of Harold Belker's, and all Lexus stipulated was a polished wood interior. Otherwise, they were happy for the production to control the design of the futuristic cars. They decided to go with magnetic levitation for the design, and the electric car was fully functional, built from the ground up, and could reach 60 miles an hour. And as it turns out, the titular Minority Report is just a MacGuffin, because as Agatha reminds John, he has a choice, and he chooses not to fulfill the prophecy, knowing that it will discredit the whole pre-crime department. The final act of the movie is full of satisfying resolutions. John's wife finds him in the graveyard, he somehow gets free, and a series of events lead to Lamar Burgess committing suicide rather than shooting John. It's a remarkably positive ending to the movie, and many question whether it was all real, or was it John comatose in the graveyard, life flashing before his eyes, and all his dreams coming true. And the movie leaves it ambiguous enough for it to be either. And now a word from our sponsors, which is you, if you'd like to be. Thank you for listening to this podcast. It's completely independent, made by me, and relies on listener support. If you're enjoying this episode and the work that I do, and you want to support an indie podcaster, if you have some spare change, you can financially contribute to the upkeep of this podcast. You're under no obligation. This podcast is free and always will be, but there are a couple of ways you can help if you wish to and if you have the means to. You can make a one-off donation at verbaldiorama.com/tips, or you can subscribe to the Patreon to support the show monthly at verbaldiorama.com/Patreon. All money made goes back into this podcast by paying for software subscriptions, website hosting, and new equipment. Huge thank you for your continued support. Now, let's learn some more about this movie and how Keanu Reeves is somehow connected to it. And it's time to segue into the obligatory Keanu reference of this episode. And if you don't know what that is, it's where I try and link the movie that I feature with Keanu Reeves just because he is the best of men. And there were a couple actually that I could have used for this. We've obviously got the Jan de Bont connection for Speed, but I feel like I use that quite frequently whenever Jan de Bont pops up or Sandra Bullock pops up in a movie. But the one thing that I thought immediately when rewatching this movie was, this movie's got Peter Stormare in it. And if you've ever seen the movie Constantine, you will know that Peter Stormare is also in the movie Constantine alongside Keanu Reeves as genuinely one of the greatest performances of the devil of all time. And so that is the easiest way to link Keanu to the movie Minority Report via Peter Stormare, who is incredibly creepy in this movie. As I mentioned, the score for Minority Report was composed and conducted by regular Spielberg collaborator John Williams. He was inspired by Bernard Herrmann's film music, and instead of focusing on science fiction elements, he made a score suitable for a film noir. Several classical pieces, including Franz Schubert's Symphony No. 8, Unfinished Symphony, Haydn's String Quartet, and Tchaikovsky's Symphony No. 6, were used in the score at the specific request of the studio. So the marketing for this movie was basically Spielberg and Cruise at the height of their respective powers. They didn't really need to market this movie. However, following the disappointing box office results of Spielberg's AI Artificial Intelligence, which came out the year before, the marketing campaign for Minority Report downplayed his role in the movie and instead sold the film as a Tom Cruise action thriller. The world premiere of Minority Report took place in New York City on the 17th of June 2002. Tom Cruise attended the London premiere the following week. The movie was released wide on the 21st of June 2002, the same week as Lilo and Stitch. It would actually beat Lilo and Stitch on the opening weekend by a few $100,000, but across the week, Lilo and Stitch was the bigger movie, and that ended up grossing number 1 that week. The summer of 2002 was a busy time at the movies, and Minority Report stayed in the top 10 for 4 weeks before exiting and re-entering a week later before exiting again. On its $102 million budget, Minority Report grossed $132.1 million domestically and $226.3 million internationally for a total worldwide gross of $358.4 million. The DVD for Minority Report was 2 years in the making, with award-winning DVD producer Laurent Bouzereau given full access to the set from the first day of filming. Bouzereau chronicled the production. He shot hundreds of hours of high-definition video, which results in more than an hour of featurettes on specific areas of filmmaking, including interviews with Steven Spielberg and Tom Cruise. The marketing campaign for the DVD and VHS release included a tie-in video game, Minority Report Everybody Runs, developed for the PlayStation 2, GameCube and Xbox, but critical response to the video game was mixed. Critical response to the movie, though, was positive. On Rotten Tomatoes, Minority Report has an 89% rating, and the site's critical consensus reads, Thought-provoking and visceral, Steven Spielberg successfully combines high-concept ideas and high-octane action in this fast and febrile sci-fi thriller. The film earned nominations for awards including Best Sound Editing at the 75th Academy Awards and Best Visual Effects at the BAFTAs, and it would lose both to The Lord of the Rings: The Two Towers. It was nominated for 11 Saturn Awards, including Best Actor for Tom Cruise, Best Supporting Actor for Max von Sydow, and Best Music for John Williams. It won 4 Best Science Fiction Film, Best Director for Steven Spielberg, Best Writing for Scott Frank and John Cohen, and Best Supporting Actress for Samantha Morton. And you could argue, how could you do a sequel to Minority Report? Well, they did try, because in 2014 it was announced that a follow-up TV series had been given a green light at Fox to be set 10 years after the film, focusing on a male precog who teams up with a female detective to find a purpose to his gift. Samantha Morton was asked to reprise the role of Agatha but turned it down. And in March 2015, Stark Sands landed the role of Dash and Meagan Good as Lara Vega, a detective haunted by her past. And the show Minority Report debuted on the 21st of September 2015 but was cancelled on the 13th of May 2016. There's also a theatre adaptation of Minority Report, which had its world premiere in February 2024 at the Nottingham Playhouse. The story is set in London, and the lead role was gender swapped to Dame Julia Anderton. Minority Report is a work of fiction. Or is it? Much of it has actually come true, in part, but the whole precog thing, predicting crimes before they happen, isn't real, right? Well, in 2018, the West Midlands Police, here in the UK, were researching a national data analytics solution that would use a combination of AI and statistics to predict violent crime. In 2022, the University of Chicago used publicly available data to predict future crimes a week before they happened. It claimed 90% accuracy in 8 US cities. In 2024, Argentina announced it was set to develop a specialised task force using artificial intelligence to identify and deter future crimes within the country. One of the main tasks of this group would be to use machine learning algorithms to analyse historical crime data to predict future crimes and prevent them, identify potential cyber threats by detecting unusual patterns in computer networks, including malware, phishing and other types of cyber attacks, and monitor social media activity to detect any signs of communication about potential future crimes. None of the news articles mention the similarity to Minority Report, but it is there and you don't even need to squint. Now, it's not surprising that in the aftermath of 9/11, there were a lot of people interested in using computers to analyse data and predict who might become a terrorist. But there's a big difference between frustratingly posting on social media after a hard day at work, something like, I hate my boss, I'm going to end him, to actually murdering your annoying manager. You can be angry about political events and express that anger, but that doesn't mean you're actually going to do something violent. And just going into the world of Minority Report for a second, even if there were no Minority Reports and it was a 100% functional, accurate system, there is still a huge ethical and moral question to locking someone up before they've done something. Surely that goes against multiple human rights laws, and you would have no right to appeal because you're placed in a medically induced coma forever. No rights, no lawyer, no due process, no judicial system, no being found not guilty for murder at least. Not to mention, as I say, the human rights of the precogs. But then these people aren't seen as human, and neither are the perpetrators, so this movie's world justifies it that way. The future in Minority Report is a future remarkably similar to our own. A hodgepodge of neo-noir, modernist aesthetics, dingy alleyways, blue-hued streets at night, holographic displays, sleek electric cars, and devices. They're eye scanners in the movie, but they're phones in our reality, tracking where everyone is and what they're doing, buying, looking at, thinking. Case in point, while I was working on Short Circuit, An appliance in my kitchen actually did short circuit. Oh, the irony. It's fine. No harm came to anything else. But that appliance is now disassembled. I mean dead, not literally disassembled. I haven't actually done that. But I've been looking at replacing it, and I've gone to several websites to price check and things like that. But now, across social media, I see ads for those appliances with offers, deals, buy from us, no, buy from us. In many ways, it's useful, but also mega annoying. Because our use of the internet on phones or laptops, looking for terms in search engines or across social media, means we are often automatically consenting to this level of targeted advertisement. Despite us having to consent to cookies and privacy settings on social media being robust, our privacy is almost always being invaded. It is inescapable, and somehow Minority Report predicted it. The more I watch this movie, the more impressed I am with how well made it is and how it treats exposition as not a throwaway thing, but actually having purpose in the conversation. The scene specifically with skeptic Danny Whitwer asking questions about how pre-crime knows the people they arrest are guilty when they have broken no law yet, and that it's not the future if you stop it. And the response is simply roll a ball, have Whitwer catch it, and be asked why he caught it. He responds because it was going to fall, and Anderton says that it didn't fall. The fact you prevent the ball from falling doesn't change the fact that it was going to fall, and I love it so much. It's a great Spielberg movie and a great Cruise movie, and while I enjoy War of the Worlds, I like this collaboration so much more. It speaks to our past, present and future, and we didn't pay attention well enough to see that this movie was actually Agatha screaming at us to run. Because if you commit a crime nowadays, you're almost automatically judged guilty by the court of public opinion, and the punishment is swift and decisive before you've even ended up in court. This is a Tom Cruise vehicle through and through, so of course he runs a lot. But Cruise is at his best when he plays against type. Interview with the Vampire, Tropic Thunder, Edge of Tomorrow are all among his best work. But even this movie, where he's the star and the reluctant hero, has an air of otherness to it. His hair is cropped, he's addicted to drugs and still mourning the loss of his son, and he's desperate to connect to holographic images to dull the pain of his loss. He has his eyes transplanted, disfigures himself, and literally runs to get to the truth about pre-crime, a system he believed in. And in the process, he can't save his son or avenge his disappearance, but he can save Agatha and he can dismantle a corrupt system. But as it turns out, despite everybody running, we still can't run from the future that this movie predicted. Thank you for listening. As always, I would love to hear your thoughts on Minority Report, and thank you for your continued support of this podcast. So the next episode, Samantha Morton returns, sort of, for the next movie of April, a story that also felt far-fetched when it came out in 2013, about a man who develops a relationship with Samantha, an AI operating system, voiced by Scarlett Johansson, a role originally played by Samantha Morton. A movie about profound loneliness and how we might combat that with AI, and also how we are combating that with AI in the modern day, for better or for worse. Please join me next week for the history and legacy of Her. Thank you for listening to Verbal Diorama, a totally free and independent podcast that relies on listener support. If you want to show your support in multiple different ways, you could leave a rating or review wherever you found this podcast. You could tell your friends and family about this podcast, or you could find me and follow me on social media and you can share the podcast that way. I am at Verbal Diorama across social media, where you can share posts, like posts, comment on posts. It all helps really to get the word out there, to hopefully get other people to know this podcast and know the recent episodes that I've put out. I genuinely love doing this podcast, and anything you could do to help would be so appreciated. A huge thank you to the incredibly generous patrons of this podcast. I could not do what I do without their support. To Simon, Laurel, Derek, Kat, Andy, Mike, Luke, Michael, Scott, Brendan, Ian, Lisa, Sam, Jack, Dave, Stuart, Nicholas, Zoe, Kev, Danny, Stu, Brett, Xenos, Sean, Rhino, Philip, Adam, Elaine, Aaron and Steve. Please consider joining them and supporting this podcast on Patreon if you have the means to. If you want to get in touch, you can email verbaldiorama@gmail.com. You can also go to verbaldiorama.com and you can fill out the contact form. You could say hello, you can give feedback, or you can give suggestions as well. I would genuinely love to hear from you. You can also DM me on social media as well, if that's an option available to you. I love to hear from people and I always try to respond as quickly as possible. Thanks again for listening and thanks for supporting independent podcasting. It means more to us than you know. And finally,
I'm sorry, Dawn, but you're gonna have to run again. Run!
bye.
Movies you know, movies you don't. Prequels, sequels, remakes, and trivia and updates. Movies you know, movies you don't. Interesting stories, all the categories.
I'm sure you've all grasped the fundamental paradox of